Alright, so I promised you a better use for these, what am I saying? For these mix shaders. So I'm going to show you how to set that up now, and also go in a little bit more about the Hypershade. Hypershade is your friend. So, we have now the corner scratch. You can see this here. So there's a few other buttons that you should be aware of. I'll show you how to sort of organize this as we go. But if you ever want to, like, you have a node in here, you can just click it and move it around. You can move any of these around. These little lines are basically showing you what's hooked up to what. So if you ever want to change this, like if you don't want the checker to be hooked up to the mix and you want this to be hooked up to something else, you should be able to sort of grab that little line, disconnect it. You can just release it entirely to disconnect it, or you could, grab this little dot and then manually hook it up to something else if you wanted to. So in this case, I'm just going to delete the whole checker texture. I don't need that at all. Actually, well, I have that there. You will see, once you have the checker, it will show up in this textures area. So I'll actually leave that there for a minute. I'll show you a fun way you can sort of get rid of that later. So, we're not going to use this, so what I'm going to do is just go ahead and detach this. You can do that manually, or you can just sort of go into your mix node and do right-click, break connection if that were still attached. But I no longer want to look at this, so what I'm going to do is just marquee select over both of these guys, and hit this little minus button thing here, and it'll remove it from the view. In this case, I would like to look at the green and the orange shaders, so I can either just middle mouse button drag them down in here, like that, or what I can do, so I'll remove this, with the orange one, I can hit this little plus button here, and that will add it down in here. That also sometimes will add things in a little bit more organized way, sort of. And you can drag these around. Again, you can see how these are connected. So basically, the orange shader is connected into shader 1, green is into shader 2, and if you look at that, it pretty much tells you that here. So it's just a very visual way of seeing what's connected to what. Each of these has little hamburger menus, which you can, like in this case, we're not really looking at what's in the shader, so I'm just going to kind of close them, but you can open them, see different information about, things if you need them. And you can also, open this stuff up. But for now, again, I want to show you guys like sort of what something more functional looks like. So instead of just applying a random checker texture to this, we are going to basically look at a model. So for something like this here, I want basically to make the effect of like chipped paint or like highlighting, wear on the edges of this. In this case, it's going to be orange and green. But there's ways to do this, and this is where it starts getting like actually sort of procedurally. So what we're going to do is just hit tab again and look up the curve. So you're looking for the aiCurvatureNode right down here. And again, aiCurvatureNode is only going to work with Arnold. If you set this up in Redshift, you're going to use slightly different nodes. It's really, really similar, honestly. So what I'm going to do is just grab the out color of this and pop that into Mix. And you'll notice that when I do that, it's like, nah, you can't. It's not letting me, it's graying it out. It's physically not letting me attach it. The Mix just wants a black and white value. If we hit this little checkbox next to out color, you'll notice that it's actually basically three things. It's an RGB value, and the out color is all of those RGB values. Mix only wants one of them, so basically you just have to pick either R, G, or B. Since these are black and white values, it doesn't really matter which one you pick. I usually just grab R because it's there. And then just pipe that into Mix. And once you select a single one, it'll apply that and be fine. You can drag a different one if you ever want to override a value. Just drag that on, and you can see it's overwritten the out color. Excuse me, being attached into the Mix, and it's now using B instead. So that should be pretty much attached, actually. And I don't know what that's doing. So what we're going to do is just see what that gives us. And in this case, it's nothing particularly fantastic. You can see, it's actually extremely hard to see. I can only see it because I know what I'm looking for, actually. There is ever so slight amounts of green that you can kind of see showing up along the edge of this here. Now, the Arnold Renderview has a really, really powerful way that you can view specific channels of your textures, which for procedural texturing is extremely helpful. Let me just shrink this down a tiny bit because it's ginormous. So if you hit this like white button with the dashed outline, it's going to render only what you have selected at the time. And in this case, I have my mix shader selected, so it'll render that. If I select orange, it's going to show me basically all the orange stuff. I'm just really only looking at this guy right now. If I select the green shader, it's going to show me only the stuff with the green shader on it. If I select this aiCurvatureNode, it's going to show me what that aiCurvatureNode looks like. So in this case, you can kind of see what it's doing, where it's making these like little white outlines on the edges of things. And that's what I want to play with. Like, this is my map. This is basically wherever's black is going to show up orange, and wherever this little white stuff is going to show up green. So you want to play with those values. And the curvature node itself has some different stuff in here you can mess with. So like if we play with the radius, you can see that's adding a lot more green to the point where it actually might show up. Yeah, so now I mean you can see a lot more green in there. So this is kind of what we're going for. Like, this is the whole idea of procedural texturing. Like, the UVs on this, they're kind of decent just because they are, but like this will work on UV'd objects, not UV'd objects. It always kind of works. So you can play with these values and just sort of like isolate them a little bit and keep playing with them until you get something that you like. And I'm not gonna lie, so like a lot of this, so like the multiply is gonna tend to make it a little brighter. Usually I just kind of play with this until I find something that I think is decent looking. I feel like a lot of these settings are kind of, to an extent, trial and error. The multiply is going to be basically, I kind of consider almost like a contrast slider a little bit. Spread is kind of almost like spread in Photoshop, actually, in a strange way. If you're adding like an outer glow to something, so you can conceivably add like a little bit more radius, and then the spread is going to kind of make that line harder almost, but I find that a lot of times it's like kind of sensitive of the value. It also comes with its own different sample node, so you could theoretically add less samples to this. If you go really, really deep into procedural texturing, it can slow down your renders because you have so many things being sampled, like samples for things being calculated. Generally, it's pretty fast, but you know it can get a little bit cumbersome at times if you go crazy with it. So this is what we have here, just for this, you know, sort of default, whatever this thing is. The other thing to be aware of is there's different things you can isolate, basically, with this curvature node. So if we look at output, this is convex. This is going to be outer corners of stuff. So stuff like the corner of a desk where, you know, you're rubbing it, something like that, and it's like rubbing paint off. Concave is going to look at the... I keep wanting to describe concave with concave, and that is entirely unhelpful. It's going to look at areas that are sort of recessed or like inner curves, things where like grime would usually collect, you know, stuff that's like going to be harder to, if you're cleaning an object, harder to wash. So this is something a lot of times we use for like dirt or something like that. Or you can do both. In this case, that doesn't do anything. Oh, goodness. That looks insane. Okay, so interestingly, when you did both, I usually just set up different nodes. I think it's a little bit easier, actually. But if you happen to like your settings, what you could do, so right now when we look at the curvature itself, you'll notice that when we set it to both, it's switched from just black and white mode to red and green. And what this is doing is it's using the red channel to highlight convex things and the green channel to highlight concave things. And the reason that that is not showing up in the shader itself, if you look at how we've attached the curvature node, we have mapping the blue in. That is the only thing that is not attached to a value. So if we grab the green, I think that was concave, and put that in, you'll notice that the shader is only working on the concave sections. If we grab the red and put that in, it's going to be working on the convex sections. So just for grins, I'm actually going to save that. I'll show you guys sort of how to hook up different, you know, use the same node multiple times. But this is the basic premise behind procedural texturing. And the power of this is that you can go in, and if I modify this green and say set it to a preset of chrome, I like chrome. So if we make this chrome, you'll see that that chrome shows up. Like anywhere that green shader was used, it's going to automatically update that and have it be chrome. And in this case, I think chrome is actually kind of hard to see, so I'm going to see what happens if I do gold, maybe, and then maybe make the orange not orange, but like a blue. I feel like blue shows things up pretty well. Cool. It's hideous, but it shows up, I guess. Sure, that works. And then if you wanted to, you can mess with the, again, sort of like the radius and some of the other settings to see if you can force a little bit more of that texture into there. Oof, that looks terrible. That's aggressive. So the threshold is basically going to look at, that seems like it maybe would be decent. Sure. So what the threshold does is it basically looks at the angle of the edge, and it says anything above this angle we're going to look at, anything below this angle we're not going to look at. So it's kind of just like a slider based on basically how sensitive you want the node to be. So that is the basics of setting up basically a single object worth of texturing, or procedural texturing. And the interesting thing, so if we look at the curvature node again, you'll see that it's behaving very, very differently based on the hard edges versus the soft edges. So depending on what you're trying to do, you might need to sort of set up different nodes to capture the different feelings you want on each of these edges, because like obviously this is showing up much more successfully than it is here. And you know, again, depending on how you play with these values, you can sort of mess with that a bit. I don't tend to use procedural texturing as much for soft objects like this. I mostly will use them for the sort of hard objects over here, and just for grins. I'm curious what horrors this texture has applied to this mushroom. That actually looks pretty sweet. That's pretty cool looking. I'm not gonna lie. I like that. I like the shiny mushroom. A weird fixation with mushrooms. But anywho, so that's the basic thing of like the first procedural texturing. I'll show you how to get more complex with this in the next video.